Imagine you're standing in a small room. There's nothing special about it. A bed, a window, and someone lying completely still on that bed. No breath, no movement. Their eyes are closed. And beside that bed, someone is crying. But there's something even more terrifying than death itself. It's the moment you realize there is nothing you can do anymore. You can't call that person back.
Oh,
You
Lord,
can't take them to the
let
hospital.
his breath
You
return.
can't beg them to open their
My
eyes.
son,
All you can
you
do
are
is
alive.
stand there and
He
accept that the
lives.
person you love has passed through a door
Hear
that
my
no
plea,
one can
Lord.
open from this side.
Restore
But what if I
this
told you
child to
that
life,
in the Bible, that door
according
was
to your
opened
mercy.
again and again, not once, not twice, but many times. There were people who died and then stood up again. There were people who were carried out of graves. There were people who opened their eyes on the very bed they had died. But here's what's strange. None of those stories were isolated miracles. They were pieces of a pattern. And when you put those pieces together, you begin to see something astonishing. The Bible seems to tell the same story over and over again across thousands of years, until finally, one man walks out of a tomb, and everything changes forever. But there's a question we have to answer first. Why? Why does the Bible tell so many stories about people coming back from the dead? If all of those people eventually died again,
not
then
weep,
what was the point of those
young man.
miracles? And why
I
was
say
the
to you,
resurrection of one man
arise.
completely different from all the others? The answer is hidden in a pattern, and once you see that pattern, you will never read the resurrection stories of the Bible the same way again. Let's begin somewhere most people would never expect.
My
Not at
daughter
the
is
tomb
dying,
of
Lord.
Jesus, not
Please
at
come and
Bethany,
place your
but in the
hands
room
on
of a
her so
mother
she
who
will
had
get well
already
and
lost
live.
everything.
Do not
Centuries
be
before Jesus ever walked the earth, there was a woman living in a place called Zarephath. She was a widow, poor, hungry, and living through
Child,
a terrible famine.
arise.
One day, the prophet
I say
Elijah
to
met
you,
her.
get
She was
up.
gathering sticks, not to prepare a feast. She was preparing her last meal, a little flour, a little oil. Then she and her son would eat and wait to die. But God performed a miracle. The flour did not run out. The oil did not run dry. Day after day, that family survived. But then, the boy became sick, and this time, no miracle
Lazarus,
came.
come
The boy
forth!
died. The mother held her son's lifeless
Take off the
body.
burial
Can you
clothes
imagine that kind
and
of
let him
pain?
go.
After being given hope, she had lost the one thing she loved most. She turned to Elijah,
brother,
but Elijah
you are
didn't
returned
argue.
to us.
He didn't explain.
He is alive.
carried the boy upstairs,
Praise be
placed
to
him on the
God.
bed, and prayed once, then again, and a third time, and then life returned to the child's body. The boy opened his eyes. The mother received her son back. This is the first recorded resurrection in the Bible. But notice something. Elijah did not possess this power on his own. He had to pray. He had to wait. He had to cry out to heaven. And that matters, because if you keep reading, you'll see the pattern begin to change. Years later, another prophet named Elisha met a wealthy woman. She had treated him
They have
kindly.
taken the
She
Lord
even built
out
a
of the
room for him
tomb.
to stay in.
Where
This woman
have
had
they
no
laid
child.
him?
But
But
then,
look,
she had
the
a son.
linens are here.
Joy had finally arrived, but years later, the boy became sick and died. Once again, a mother stood beside a bed. Once again, a lifeless body lay completely still. Once again, death appeared to have won. But Elisha came. He
Tabitha,
entered the room,
arise.
closed the door, and lay himself
She
over
is
the
alive
child,
again.
eye to eye, mouth to
Praise
mouth,
be to
hand
God.
to hand.
Do
then
not
the
be
child's
alarmed,
body began to grow warm.
for his
And
life
then,
is in
something
him.
strange happened. The child sneezed once, twice,
He is
3
alive.
times,
Do not
7
trouble
times.
yourselves,
And then
for his
the
life
boy
is
opened
in
his
him.
eyes. A dead
A true
child
miracle
stood
from the
up.
Lord.
But look closely. This miracle still required a prophet. It still required the presence of a living person. It still required intervention from outside. Until something strange happened, and it changed the entire pattern. Years after Elisha died, a group of men were burying a man. But then they saw their enemies approaching. They panicked. There was no time. They threw the dead man's body into a nearby tomb. And that tomb happened to belong to Elisha. The body fell down and touched the bones of the dead prophet. And immediately, the dead man came back to life. No one prayed. No one called his name. No one tried to perform a miracle. Just one touch. A dead man touched the bones of another dead man and came back to life. Stop here for a moment, because this story is telling us something. The power was never really in Elisha. He was only being used. And if the power didn't come from him, then where did it come from? That question would have to wait, because hundreds of years later, a man appeared, and for the first time, the way resurrection happened began to change completely. One day, Jesus was entering a town called Nain, and as he approached the city gate, another crowd was coming out. Two crowds met. One was going in, one was going out. One represented life, the other represented death, and in the middle of them was a coffin, a dead man, but the mother walking behind him was what made the story heartbreaking. She was a widow, and the dead man was her only son. No husband, no son, no future, and the strangest part is, no one asked Jesus to do anything. No one ran to him. No one said, "Please save my son." Jesus simply saw her, and he had compassion. Then he said, "Do not weep," a strange thing to say, because if a person cannot do anything about death, then "do not weep" would be meaningless. But Jesus didn't just speak. He touched the coffin. Then he said to the dead man, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the dead man sat up. Then he began to speak. Notice the difference. Elijah had to pray, Elisha had to struggle, but Jesus only had to speak. No begging,
Arise,
no ritual,
my children,
no pleading,
and
He
come
spoke,
home.
and death had to listen.
Your time
but
of
that
slumber
wasn't the
is
most
now
astonishing thing. Another day, a man named Jairus came running to Jesus. He was a leader, a man of position, someone who probably would never have knelt before a man like Jesus under normal circumstances. But his daughter was dying, and when your child is dying, status becomes meaningless. Jairus fell at Jesus' feet. He begged him to come. Jesus went with him, but along the way, Jesus stopped. Another woman needed him. Time passed, and then, the terrible news arrived. Your daughter is dead. Imagine that moment. You ran to find hope. You found the person you believed could save your child. But now, it was too late. But Jesus said, "Do not be afraid. Only believe." He entered the room. People were crying. Everyone knew the girl was dead. But Jesus said, "She is not dead. She is sleeping." They laughed at him, because they knew death. They had seen the body. They knew the truth. But Jesus walked over. He took the girl's hand and said, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And the girl stood up. She walked, and Jesus said something almost strangely ordinary, "Give her something to eat." The girl had come back to life. But remember one word, sleep, because Jesus was beginning to change the way we look at death. To humanity, death is the end, but to him, it is like sleep, a sleep that one day, someone will awaken from. But then, the story reaches another place, Bethany, a family Jesus loved. Lazarus, Martha, Mary. Lazarus became sick. His sisters sent word, "Lord, the one you love is sick." If you were Jesus, what would you do? You would run to him. You would heal him. But Jesus didn't. He waited 1 day, 2 days, then he left. When he arrived, Lazarus had been
Hosanna,
dead, not for a few hours,
in the
not
highest.
for 1 day, 4 days.
Amen.
His body had already begun to decay. All hope was gone. Martha ran out and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It's a painful sentence. But Jesus answered with a statement the entire Bible seemed to have been waiting thousands of years to hear. He didn't say, "I will pray for Lazarus to rise." He didn't say, "God can raise Lazarus." He said, "I am the resurrection and the life." Listen carefully. Not, "I know the resurrection."
Hallowed be your
Not,
name,
"I have
O Lord.
resurrection power."
Grant
But I am
us
the
your
resurrection.
peace
That
and
is the
mercy.
turning point. Elijah asked for power. Elisha was given power, but Jesus declared that he himself was the source of that power. Then he went to the tomb. A stone stood in front of it. Jesus said, "Roll the stone away." Martha objected. "It's been for days," but they did it anyway. And then, Jesus called out, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man walked out, still wrapped in grave clothes. A man who had been dead for 4 days was standing in front of them. But right here, we need to stop. Because if you think this story ends with a miracle, you've missed the most important part. Lazarus came back to life, but Lazarus would still die again. Jairus' daughter would still die. The widow's son would still die. The Shunammite woman's son would still die. Every one of them would eventually face another grave. So what were these miracles really? They were not the final victory over death. They were a delay, a gift of extra time, a chance to return, only to eventually die again. And this is where everything changes. Because Jesus was about to enter a tomb of his own. Before that happened, remember what we've seen. One person came back through prayer. One came back through physical contact. One came back simply by touching a prophet's bones. One came back when Jesus spoke. A little girl came back when he took her hand. Lazarus came back after 4 days in the grave. Each story was like another step, another knock, as if someone were standing at the door of death, preparing to open it. Then came the day. Jesus was crucified. The sky grew dark, the earth shook, the curtain of the temple was torn in two, and then, something strange happened. Graves opened. People who had died were seen in the city. Think about that. At the very moment Jesus died, death itself began to lose control, as if death could no longer hold the dead. But that was only the beginning, because 3 days later, another tomb would open, and this time, no one would call him out. There was no Elijah, no Elisha, no one praying, no one laying hands on a body, no one saying, "Arise," because this time, no one else called him out. He walked out himself. It was still dark. A few women went to the tomb. They weren't going there to witness a miracle. They were going to finish a final ritual. They carried spices. They thought they were about to see a body. A dead teacher, someone they loved, had been killed. But when they arrived, the stone had already been rolled away. The tomb was empty, and they heard a question, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" That was the moment
Hear my
everything
plea,
changed,
Lord.
because everyone
Restore
before
this
Jesus
child to
had been
life,
called back from death.
according to
But
your
Jesus
mercy.
didn't just come back. He walked through death, and he never returned to it. Lazarus came back, and one day died again. Others came back, only to eventually face another grave. But Jesus did not come back to die again. He walked out of the tomb, with the body no longer under the power of death. And this is the word you need to remember: first fruits in a harvest. The farmer doesn't bring the first bundle of grain because it is the entire harvest. He brings it because it is a promise. If the first bundle is ripe, the rest of the harvest is coming. If the first fruits have appeared, the harvest is still ahead. And that is what the resurrection of Jesus means. He was not simply another person brought back to life. He was
Do not
the
weep.
first fruits.
Young
he was
man,
proof that death
I
does
say
not
to
have
you,
the final word.
arise.
He was the promise that the grave is not the end. He was the first to rise, so that others could follow. And now, you can understand why those earlier stories existed. Elijah, Elisha, the man who touched Elisha's
My daughter
bones,
is dying,
the widow's
Lord.
son,
Please
Jairus'
come and
daughter,
place your hands
Lazarus.
on her so she will get
All of
well
those
and live.
stories were
Do
not
not
the
be
ending. They were signs, like the first rays of light breaking through a dark room. They were saying death is not unbeatable, but Jesus said something greater.
Child,
I am the resurrection.
arise.
And then, something
I say
strange
to you,
continued
get
to happen.
up.
After Jesus rose, that power didn't disappear. A woman named Tabitha died. The believers called for Peter. Peter entered the room. He knelt down. He prayed. Then he said, "Tabitha, arise," and she opened her eyes. Then there was a man named Eutychus. One night, Paul was preaching. For a very long time, a young man was sitting by a window. He
Lazarus,
fell asleep.
come
then
forth!
He fell from an upper floor and died.
Take off the
Paul
burial
went down,
clothes
embraced
and
him,
let him go.
and the young man came back to life. Do you see what's happening? The prophets once had to
My
pray.
brother,
Jesus only
you are
had
returned
to speak.
to us.
And after Jesus
He is
rose,
alive.
his followers began to do
Praise be to
similar
God.
things. But there was still one important difference. Tabitha would die again. Eutychus would die again. They were brought back, but they were not yet completely free from death. Only one tomb remained empty. Only one. And that's why the resurrection of Jesus was not just another miracle. It was the center of the entire story. Now go back to that first room. The bed, the lifeless body, the loved one standing beside it. That is where all of us will eventually stand. Or maybe you've already stood there. Maybe you've held the hand of someone
have
you
taken
love
the Lord
and felt
out
it
of the
grow
tomb.
cold. Maybe you've received
Where
a phone
have they
call in
laid
the middle
him?
of the night.
But look,
maybe you've walked
the
into
linens
a
are
room
here.
and realized that someone you loved would never speak to you again. And if you've experienced that, you know a truth that no philosophy can erase. Death hurts. It isn't an idea, it's real. An empty chair, a silent room, a name you will never hear spoken again.
Tabitha,
Humanity has tried to find
arise.
ways to deal with death for thousands
She is
of years.
alive
Some
again.
say live your best life.
Praise be to
Some
God.
say leave a legacy.
Do not be
Some
alarmed,
say people live forever
for
in the
his
memories
life
of those who
is
love
in
them.
him.
But the Bible makes a much greater claim. It doesn't say learn
He
to
is
accept
alive.
the wall. It
Do
says
not
the
trouble
wall has a
yourselves,
door,
for
and
his
one man
life is
walked
in
through
him.
that door.
A
Not
true
to tell
miracle
us a
from the
beautiful
Lord.
story, but to prove that death is not the final ending. That's why Paul could say, "Oh death, where's your victory?" He didn't say that because death isn't frightening. He said it because he knew Death no longer has the final authority. But the story isn't over, because the Bible doesn't only tell us about people who came back to life. It also tells us about people who will rise. Daniel saw a day when those who sleep in the dust of the earth will awaken. Jesus spoke of a day when those in the graves will hear his voice. And Paul spoke of a day when death itself will finally be swallowed up in victory. Look at the entire pattern. A mother loses her son, a child dies, a man touches the bones of a dead prophet and lives, a little girl stands up, a young man sits up, Lazarus walks out of the grave. Graves open, Jesus rises, the disciples continue the miracles, and then, one final day is still waiting ahead. Do you realize what that means? The list of people who will rise doesn't end with Lazarus, it doesn't end with Jesus, and it doesn't even end with Tabitha or Eutychus. According to the promise of Scripture, the final resurrection has not happened yet, and this time, the list won't contain one name, it will contain countless people, maybe even you. So the next time you read about someone rising from the dead in the Bible, don't just see a miracle, see the pattern. Elijah was a sign, Elisha was a sign, Lazarus was a sign. They were all saying the same thing: death is not unbeatable. But then Jesus walked out of the tomb, and he said something greater: death has been defeated. That's the difference. The others were given more time. He gave hope. The others returned to their old lives. He entered a new kind of life. The others would eventually need another grave. His grave remains empty, and that's why this story isn't only about the past. It's about your future. One day, there will be another bed, another room. Someone will stand beside a lifeless body, and everything inside them will want to believe this is the end. But if the Bible is true, it isn't the end. It's only a comma, because the final chapter has not yet been written. And perhaps
Arise, my
that's
children,
why Job could stand
and
in
come
the ashes
home.
of his life, having
Your
lost
time of
everything,
slumber is
broken,
now done.
in pain, and still say, I know that my Redeemer lives. Not I hope, not I wish, but I know. And now, after seeing the entire pattern, you can understand why he could say it. Because the Bible story was never really about people who died and came back. It was about one man who walked through death to prove that one day, death itself would no longer be the final place we go. And if there is only one thing you remember from this video, remember this: every grave in the Bible is pointing your eyes toward one grave. And every resurrection is pointing toward one resurrection, the resurrection of Jesus, because the others were called back from death. But he walked out of death and opened the door for everyone who would follow him. And the final question isn't who came back to life in the Bible. The real question is, when that voice calls again one day, will you rise?